The Minnesota Vikings finished the 2025 NFL season 9-8 and entered the offseason with a ton of questions. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Minnesota Vikings and why I personally believe they are still one of the more underrated teams in the NFL. Hit the like and subscribe button if you're new and going to enjoy. Let's have some fun. So the Vikings 2025 season was one that I think a lot of Vikings fans would like to take away from their eyes. It was a pretty unfortunate season in a lot of different ways. You know, obviously you get the win versus Chicago and you have that JJ McCarthy fourth quarter, and it starts to give you a little bit of hope, and then week 2 happens and it was kind of just not great, and then he got hurt. You had Carson Wentz get in there. JJ McCarthy comes back, and he has a couple positive moments throughout this even the season and throughout the stretch, but the team was not very good. And then for whatever reason, despite the fact that McCarthy wasn't playing great, he took a slight step forward. They did go on a 5-game win streak to end the season to somehow go 9-8. It was a year that I think a lot of Vikings fans would like to forget. This was a team just a few years ago that was contending or winning the NFC North, was one of the best teams in the NFL, looking like a perennial playoff team, playoff threat. If they could just find the right guy at quarterback, potential Super Bowl champions or contenders. And so when they took JJ McCarthy, the thought process was, hey, we now have this guy. We're going to let him sit for a year and then become the guy once he's ready to be healthy and ready to play. And as we all know, last year, JJ McCarthy just point blank did not play very well. Now we're going to have the further conversation on JJ McCarthy here in a second, but really in this video, what I wanted to focus on is what happened in the offseason, why I still think they're underrated, and then of course we'll have the conversation about the quarterbacks along the way. But with that said, let's go ahead and talk about what they did in free agency and the draft, because I thought they did some pretty interesting things. So let's go ahead and start off with the free agency process. I mean, you obviously have Kyler Murray in the fold, you brought back Aaron Jones, you signed Juwan Jennings, you brought in James Pierre, who I think is a pretty underrated player, and you got Tavierre Thomas back, Johnny Hacker, etc., etc. Really the biggest ones here: James Pierre, Juwan Jennings, and of course, Kyler Murray. Let's start off with the Kyler Murray conversation, and this will kind of lead us into JJ McCarthy a little bit as well. Kyler Murray, of course, is the former starting quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals, a player that has shown a lot of promise throughout his career, has made a couple Pro Bowls, I believe one Offensive Rookie of the Year. He has been a productive player. Obviously, we can't forget, was the Heisman Trophy winner back in, 2018. So we got a guy here in Kyler Murray who has been a okay football player throughout his career. In the NFL, obviously, high school and college, he was a beast. But in the NFL, he just hasn't quite been able to find his consistent footing, right? 2019, 20 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 3,700 yards. 2020, arguably maybe the best year of his young career, 3,900 yards, 26 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. The year after, another promising season, 3,700 yards, 24 touchdowns, 10 picks. But then in 2022, you had some injuries. 2023, you had some injuries. 24 was mostly healthy, just wasn't very good. And this past year started off the season very kind of disappointing at times and then ended up getting hurt and missed the rest of the year. We all know how talented Kyler Murray is. At this stage of his career, he is who he is. He's a 28-year-old player that, he's not the same, the sky is the ceiling type of guy, because he is older and he's reached a lot of his potential. He is an undersized quarterback with a good arm and good mobility, but has dealt with a lot of injuries the past couple of years, and so it just didn't work out there in Arizona. I think that Kyler Murray is still a starting level quarterback in this league, and I think in the right situation with the right players around him that he could find success. And the fact that you got Kyler Murray on a super cheap contract, a player that, again, former Heisman, former Offensive Rookie of the Year, Pro Bowler, first overall pick, and all this and that, I think getting him on a 1-year deal is exceptional value, especially when you had such a massive question mark at the quarterback position, not really knowing what you have in JJ McCarthy, not really trusting Carson Wentz to help you win games and get you into the postseason. Adding on a Kyler Murray, who again has a lot of question marks to him, but you only brought him in on a cheap 1-year kind of prove it deal, I think is very smart. If he goes out there and balls out and you make the playoffs and make a deep playoff run with Kyler leading the way, then you have your franchise quarterback in Kyler Murray and you give him that long-term extension. But if he has a mediocre year, or if he gets injured, or if he just, doesn't have the year that Minnesota Vikings fans want him to have, then you get off the deal and you're either going back to JJ or you're going to be looking at a quarterback somewhere else. So I think bringing in Kyler Murray, assuming that he will be the starter at some point this year, I think is a worthy investment. Going into Juwan Jennings a little bit, I was a little surprised that he got such a cheap contract, only 1 year, $8 million, but I guess there's $13 million worth up to with incentives. Jauan Jennings is such an interesting player because the production is really good with this guy. It just kind of feels like everyone's sort of scared of him. I mean, over the course of his career, obviously, kind of took a little bit for him to really get going, but had almost 1,000 yards in 2024. And last year, despite playing through some injuries, still had 643 yards that season with 9 touchdowns, by the way. The past 2 years, he's been one of the better receivers out there. And I find it a bit interesting that no team was really interested in bringing him back. And, part of that I do think is, again, going back to some of the on the field antics, his personality, the fire that he plays with. And I did find it interesting that of all the teams in the league that could have had interest in a guy like a Jauan Jennings, it was the Minnesota Vikings that ultimately got him. And I find that interesting because you already have Jordan Addison, you already have Justin Jefferson, and Jauan Jennings to me is like a pretty solid wide receiver too for some teams. So for him to sign a deal with, only a 1-year deal at that, to be your third option, maybe second option, depending on injuries, I mean, it's good value. Again, the Kyler Murray move, 1-year deal, excellent value. I think this move for Jauan Jennings, 1-year deal, excellent value. It's the same conversation with Kyler. If Jauan Jennings proves to be a pivotal part of your offense next year, then you give him the extension. If not, you let him go elsewhere. So I really like the investment. I think 1-year deals should be done, in my opinion, more often in this league. And here you go with Jauan Jennings and Kyler Murray on these short 1-year deals to prove their worth and prove their talents. And then James Pierre, he had a really productive year last year for Pittsburgh. I know that PFF is not the say-all be-all, but I think these numbers, speak volume here. 377 total snaps, an 89.7 coverage grade with an 86.8 overall grade. Even going back to 2024, for example, not nearly the same numbers here, but 200 snaps and overall decent grades in general. Not great, not as good as this past year, but still pretty good. This is back in 2022. I'm not sure how many snaps, 260, so never a full-time starter, but still some decent numbers. And you get this guy on a 2-year, $8.5 million deal with only 3.7 of it being fully guaranteed, and you let him work in a Brian Flores system, a system that I think is very friendly to corners and to defensive backs. So I think it's good value again. So even though I don't think they necessarily hit too many home runs, I think getting a starting level quarterback in Kyler, a wide receiver 2/3 in Jauan Jennings, and signing a potential starting secondary member for you, all for very cheap. You put all these contracts together over the course of 1 year, they're going to pay these guys probably less than 18 million combined for these 3 guys for this upcoming season. And I think that's really smart. So again, they didn't really hit a home run necessarily. A home run would be oh, we got Joe Burrow, we traded for Myles Garrett, we did this, we did that. They didn't quite do that necessarily, but this roster really didn't needed them to do it. If anything, they just needed to get a couple of starters here and there and to give them a chance to win games and really just figure out who the quarterback is. So I thought it was smart. I thought it was a good way of going about the offseason. No need to spend big money when there's the possibility of a potential big fish at quarterback popping up next year or something along those lines. So you want to keep your options open, and I think what they did this offseason in terms of free agency was quite smart. In terms of their draft, I'm really going to focus in on a couple key players here. You took Caleb Banks at 18, Jake Gaulday at 51, Dominique Orange at 82, Caleb Tiernan at 97, Jacoby Thomas at 98, Max Bredesen at 159, Charles Demings at 163, Damon Claiborne at 198, and Gavin Gerhardt at 235. I thought this was a really interesting draft class for a number of reasons. I think I wasn't a big fan of Jacoby Thomas, but I didn't hate it. I think it's an interesting fit in terms of how he can work in the system. But again, I didn't love this pick. And then Max Bredesen is a true fullback. But outside of that, I really like what they did here. This was a draft class that kind of like their free agency didn't have a ton of massive home runs. You did not make the big move for a Ruben Bain, or you didn't make the big trade up for one of these top guys in the class. I thought they let the board get to them, and I thought they attacked it a very strategic way. In terms of, hey, we're going to live probably this year off the back of our defense because we're figuring things out at quarterback. So let's just put together a draft class full of a lot of really good, talented football players on the defensive side to build up a potential top defense down the road while we figure some things out on the offense. And the thing is with the offense is the offense already has a lot of talent already on it, right? Having Justin Jefferson, having Jordan Addison, having some pieces on the offensive line. You've already invested a good bit on that offense. I think having a draft class where, outside of 2 or 3 picks, basically all on defense, I thought was pretty smart. In terms of each picks, Caleb Banks has a extremely high ceiling. The problem is he just has to stay healthy. I think he is starting to finally get healthy this offseason, so hopefully he'll be ready to roll for training camp, but I love his fit. I think he is a dynamic football player that if he can manage to stay healthy for a full season, has the potential to be a real contributor on this defense as both a pass rusher, run defender, disruptor, all that sort of stuff. Jake Golday is a well-sized, lengthy, good athlete at linebacker, can play multiple roles. He played a lot of nickel for Cincinnati, so I think it'll be interesting to see how Flores ultimately does deploy him. But I mean, he's a very good, versatile player that I think will fill a lot of needs for this team. Dominique Orange, sort of that big run stuffer up the middle. Caleb Tiernan, I mean, back-to-back picks of just big dudes. Tiernan can play a little guard, can play some tackle. We'll see if he maybe can develop into being a starter. I think worst case, he'll be a really solid swing tackle for you. Who else? We got Charles Deming, somebody who I was pretty high on and I think is a absolute dog. Like, if you're gonna play at Stephen F. Austin and move your way into the draft and be at, you know, the Senior Bowl and all that stuff, you have to be a dog. You have to be a dude. And I think he showed that throughout his tape, both in like the Senior Bowl and the camps and whatnot, and of course his tape at Stephen F. Just an absolute dog, somebody that I think he'll make the team. I have a good feeling. I think he will. And I wouldn't be surprised if he contributes in a couple different ways. And then Damon Claiborne, like of all these guys on day 3, I think Damon Claiborne has the best chance to be a starter at some point. I was very high on Damon Claiborne. I thought the league was way too low on him. I personally believe that he could have been B3/4 in this past class. And I think getting this in Minnesota, a team that in my opinion does need running backs, I thought was pretty smart. So, I mean, again, like their free agency, it wasn't like an A+, just, oh my God, they absolutely nailed the offseason. But I thought like their free agency was a solid B. I thought their draft class was also like a B to, you know, B+, something along those lines. This roster already had kind of the bones of what they needed, right? You already have the Justin Jeffersons. You already have your Dallas Turners, your Andrew Van Ginkels, your Byron Murphys, your Christian Darrisaw, and you just keep going up and down the list of all the talented players they already had. It was just, okay, let's now plug away at a couple little needs, start building towards the future, and really start to prepare our young quarterback either this year, whether it's JJ or Kyler, or somebody next year, to have a roster that's already like stacked with talent. And again, we're going to look at the depth chart here. There's not a lot of big time needs for this team, because when you look at this team, it is a very talented football team. Offensively speaking, I think Kyler will be your week 1 starter, and I wouldn't doubt JJ McCarthy quite yet. I think that given another year under his belt, another year in the system, like let's see if he can do something here. I don't want to give up on him yet. I'm not feeling good about it, but let's see what he can do. You got Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason, Damon Claiborne. I don't love this running back room. I just think Jones at this stage of his career isn't the dynamic back he once was. But I think Mason is a quality role player. And again, I think Damon Claiborne is somebody to really keep an eye on. I would not be a shock too much if he ends up starting. You got Jefferson, you got Addison, you got Jennings, you got Ty Felton in here. I think that's one of the better wide receiver cores in the league. You got TJ Hawkinson, you got Josh Oliver. I would like to see them maybe look at adding another tight end at some point. Maybe next year with like a Trey'Dez Green or the guy from Oregon, who I'm blanking on his name, but one of those guys. Your offensive line, obviously, the big thing is just health. Can Will Fry stay healthy? Can Christian Darrisaw stay healthy for a full year? You know, you got Blake Brendel, you got Donovan Jackson, now in year 2 for him. You got Brian O'Neill. If you can keep this offensive line healthy, it should be pretty good. That's just the big question mark. Can they, of course, stay healthy? Defensively, a lot of really good players here. You have Caleb Banks up in the middle with Dominique Orange. You have Jalen Redmond. You have Drake Rodriguez. You have Van Ginkel, Wilson, Cashman, Ivan Pace, Jake Golden. I actually really like their linebacker core. Dallas Turner. It's a big year for him to take another step forward. You got Rodgers. You got Pierre, who I think will be a starter for them this year. You got Byron Murphy, you got Theo, you got Metellus. Hopefully they can all stay healthy. Again, like, not a lot of problems with this team. Like, genuinely speaking, like, maybe I would like a better cornerback 1, perhaps. Maybe I'd like more depth on the offensive line. Maybe I'd like a more dynamic running back, maybe like a Kejuan Lacey. That'd be sweet. But at the end of the day, this roster is so talented. And I think they have very good coaches as well. I think Kevin O'Connell's an offensive genius. I think Brian Flores is one of the best defensive minds out there. This team has what you need to succeed. It just comes down to the quarterback. Whether it's Kyler, JJ, Carson Wentz, or Max Brosmer, one of those guys has to be good this year. Because as long as one of those guys is a quality starter, this team should be back in the playoffs. And I think if they're not in the postseason and the quarterback plays well, then you're probably resetting at head coach and maybe Flores gets the starting head coaching position. I don't know. But this roster is too talented to not make it into the postseason. And it all starts at that quarterback position. If the quarterback position, whether it is JJ McCarthy, now in year 2 as the starter, year 3 of his young NFL career, or if it's Kyler Murray, who's still fairly young in his own age, one of those two guys has to work out. I personally think Kyler gives you the better chance today, but I would not sleep on JJ McCarthy. I think Kyler has a higher ceiling, I think JJ is more of the unknown right now, and he's also younger and still developing. So do you want to give up on him right now? I don't know. It's such an interesting battle between these two, and I'm very excited to see who does end up winning. And I think for the Vikings, if I was a Vikings fan, I think I'd actually be rooting for JJ McCarthy to win this job, because if JJ does win the job, that means that he is taking steps forward and actually like developing the way you want him to. Last year was so bad that we had some conversations of like, can he do it? Can he be an NFL quarterback? But if he does win the job over Kyler Murray, and let's say he beats him outright, it's not like a bias thing or anything like that. It's like, no, JJ was just better in camp. Then that's a really positive sign. But if JJ doesn't win the job and Kyler wins the job, then, the JJ McCarthy conversation probably gets a lot darker, and you're probably looking at maybe finding that other young quarterback this upcoming draft or somewhere down the road. Not to mention, I think Minnesota, I think they're keeping eyes on guys like Joe Burrow right now. I think they're keeping eyes on quarterbacks that are not in ideal situations that maybe could become available and fit this team perfectly. Like, you're telling me Joe Burrow wouldn't want to play with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and, this offensive coordinator and stuff like that? Like, I'm sure he would. This would be the best defense he's ever had. So keep an eye on all that stuff. But really quickly, I do want to go ahead and pop at their schedule real quick, and then I'll get you guys out of here. Let's look at their schedule. I have not looked at this yet, so this is my first time looking at it. We have an early bye week at week 6. Not the most ideal thing in the world. I like my bye weeks more at like week 10 or 9, but a week 6, I guess it could be a little worse. You get Green Bay, Chicago, Tampa Bay, Miami, and New Orleans. I think with Minnesota, if you can split one of these two NFC North games, I think you're maybe hoping for 3-2 or 4-1 in this early stretch. Then you get Indianapolis, Detroit, Buffalo, Green Bay, San Francisco, Atlanta, Carolina, New England, Detroit, Washington, Jets, and Bears. Okay, sort of a interesting schedule. This is a very manageable schedule in a lot of ways. Again, I think you can probably go 3-2, 5-1, or 4-1 in this early stretch. You got Indy. It's, I think, a winnable game. I think if you can, this is a tough stretch here with Lions, Bills, Packers, Niners. If you can go 2-2 in this stretch, I think that's pretty positive stuff. But I think 1-3, maybe 0-4 is also very possible too. These are 4, let's call a spade, Super Bowl contenders. And I don't think Minnesota's quite yet there. So if you can go 2-2, then you're looking happy, and you're very happy about that, but we'll see. But then after that, you have a couple winnable games: Atlanta, Carolina. You got Patriots and Detroit again. These are always tough. Hopefully you can split with Detroit. That would be good. Washington, New York Jets, or Washington, Jets, Chicago. Pretty interesting schedule. I gotta be honest with you. It's a pretty interesting schedule. You went 9-8 last year. Granted, it was like a weird 9-8 where you're like 4-7 at one point, and then ran off 5 straight wins to end the year off to go 9-8, which oddly enough did not put you last in your division, which is crazy. I'm thinking this year, like, if I had to set the over under at 10.5, I don't know what I would take. I really don't. I have no clue if I would take the over under. I think today I would take the under, because I think 10 wins is pretty possible for this team. But 11, 12, 13, I'm a little bit more like pessimistic on that side of things. But I think they're underrated. I really do. I think there's a lot of people who are going to say this team might win 7 or 8 or 6 games next year. I just don't see that happening. This team is way too talented. And if they can just figure out this quarterback spot, this Vikings team probably would be contending for championships. It's so frustrating. It's the same thing with like the Browns the past couple of years, the Indianapolis Colts for several years, well, still today, Falcons to some extent. The Vikings kind of feel like they're in a similar mold, except they had Kirk Cousins for a few years, who was good but not great, and now you're just trying to figure something out there. This roster's so talented, and I would hate to see it go to waste with bad quarterback play. But the schedule in general is like manageable, more leaning towards being kind of difficult at times, but I think you could probably win at least 9 to 10, maybe 11 wins if Kyler plays well or JJ plays well. But again, it all just comes down to your coaching staff, your quarterback, and how that stuff works out. Because if you have good quarterback play, you're going to be contending for a championship. But if not, we're going to be back here having some very similar conversations next offseason. So Vikings fans, let me know in the comment section below. What is your confidence level at quarterback? Who do you want to win the job? And how many games you're going to win next year? All that stuff, put it in the comments. I'll make sure to respond to it. And if you guys are new here, we are so close to 20,000 subscribers. We might already have it by the time you're watching it. But if not, make sure you guys subscribe. We're near it. We're so close. Have a great day, and I love you guys. Peace.